Yuval Noah Harari, welcome back to our program.
Oh, it's good to be here. Thank you.
Well, these are extraordinary days. I don't know, you have written obviously a lot about history, a lot about what makes us human. Have you seen in modern times, in our technological, economic, globalized society, a crisis quite like this one?
Like this one, not really. I mean, we haven't seen an epidemic, a global epidemic like this for at least 100 years. And really, nobody has a living experience of what's going, of what we are seeing now, which is part of what makes it so frightening and so alarming. But when you look at the broader perspective of history, then yes, humanity has dealt with many such epidemics before, and we are probably in a better situation than ever before in history to deal with such an outbreak.
Because of?
Because of modern medicine. When the Black Death erupted in the 14th century, so it swept from China to Britain in about 10 years, killing between a quarter and half of the entire population of Asia and Europe, and nobody had any idea what is happening, what is the cause of the disease, and what can be done about it. Today, with the coronavirus epidemic, it took just 2 weeks for scientists and doctors not just to identify the virus behind the outbreak, but also to sequence its entire genome and to develop tests that at least tell us who has the virus and who hasn't. So there is still a way until we overcome this, but we are, as I say, in a better position than in any previous time in history.
But let's not forget that this swept from China to Britain to the United States within a much, much shorter period of just a few months. What, as an ordinary citizen now, frightens you most, or do you wish most could happen to stop the panic at least?
I think the worst thing is the disunity we see in the world, the lack of cooperation and coordination between different countries, and the lack of trust, both between countries and also between the population and the government. This is basically the payday for what we've been seeing in the last few years with the epidemic of fake news and with the deterioration of international relations. If you compare this, for example, to the 2008 financial crisis, which is, of course, a crisis of a different kind, but there are similarities. In 2008, you had responsible adults in the world which took a leadership position, rallied the world behind them, and prevented the worst outcomes. But over the last 4 years, basically, we've seen a rapid deterioration of trust in the international system. The country which was the leader previously, both in the 2008 financial crisis and also in the last big epidemic, the Ebola epidemic in 2014, and that country is the United States, now it's not taking any kind of leadership position. Actually, since 2016, the current administration has made it very clear that the US has resigned its role as world leader. It made it very clear that the US has no longer any friends in the world. It has only interests. And even if now the US, which is not doing so far, but even if it will try to assume a leadership position, nobody would really follow a leader whose motto is me first. So what really frightens me is the lack of leadership and cooperation. And what people should realize is that the spread of the epidemic in any one country threatens the entire world because of the danger that if we don't contain this in time, the virus will evolve. That's maybe one of the worst problems with this kind of epidemic, is actually a rapid evolution of the virus. We saw it before with the 2014 Ebola epidemic. It actually started, the real epidemic started with one genetic mutation in one virus in one person in West Africa, which turned Ebola from a relatively rare disease into a raging epidemic, because this single mutation increased the contagiousness of the virus 4 times. Now, this could be happening right now, somewhere in Iran or in Italy or anywhere else, and wherever it happens, it endangers the entire world. So humanity needs to close ranks against the viruses.
You say close ranks, and that seems to be contrary to what, let's say, the populists and the nationalists have said, as you say, since 2016, whether it's in the United States, here in the UK, and elsewhere around the world, that globalization is just bad and we need to always close ranks so that we don't get anything bad from across borders. But you're saying now that has proved to be a bankrupt theory when dealing with this kind of crisis.
Yeah, because you can't deal with the virus really. I mean, you can't prevent epidemics through isolation. You can only prevent them with information. If you really want to isolate yourself to the degree that you are not exposed to outside epidemics, going back even to the Middle Ages is not enough. Because we had these kinds of epidemics even in the Middle Ages. If you really want to isolate yourself as a strategy against epidemics, you need to go back all the way to the Stone Age. And nobody can do that. The real border you need to protect very carefully is not between countries, but the border between the human world and the virus sphere. Humans are surrounded by an enormous variety of viruses in all kinds of animals and places. And if a virus crosses this border anywhere in the world, it endangers the entire human species. This is the border we should really be thinking about. If a virus originating, for example, in a bat manages to cross the border into the human species anywhere in the world, that virus then adapts to the human body, and then it's a danger to everybody all over the world. Now, it's an illusion to think that in the long term you can protect yourself against that virus by simply closing the borders of your country. The more effective policy is to police the border between humankind and the virus world.
How do you do that?
So if by supporting health systems all over the world, by realizing that something that is happening now in West Africa or in Iran or in China, it's not just a threat to the Iranians or the Chinese, it's also a threat to the Israelis. So we need more organizations like the World Health Organization and more international solidarity to help the country which is currently most affected deal with this crisis, whether it is by sending them equipment and personnel, and more than anything else, good information, good scientific information, or it is by economic support. A country where an outbreak begins, if it thinks it's on its own, it will hesitate to take drastic quarantine measures, because it says, well, if we lock down the entire country or entire cities, we will collapse economically and nobody will come to help us. So let's wait and see whether it really is such a big danger. And then it's too late. Now, if a country like, I don't know, like Italy would know that if it locks itself down, it will receive help from other countries, it will be willing to take this drastic measure sooner, and this will be a benefit for the whole of humanity. Again, every euro that Germany or France spends in supporting Italy in such a situation would save them 100 euros later on, not having to deal with the epidemic in their own cities.
Now that this whole virus is out of the box and there's been, one could say, a slow response around the world to trying to police that border between the virus and human beings, Italy has taken a drastic measure. I mean, the whole country's in lockdown.
Yes.
What do you think about that?
I would say that this is a test, especially for the European Union, which has lost a lot of support over the last few years And this is the chance for the European Union to really prove its worth. This is the time for the other members of the Union to come to Italy's support. If they do that, they will not only protect their own citizens, but they will show the value of such a system like the European Union. If they don't do that, the virus could destroy the Union and not just individual human lives.
I want to ask you about the social impact. Does something like this, where people are forced to self-isolate with very little information, with very little testing, with very little belief in what they're being told, how do you see this affecting society?
Well, the immediate issue is the issue of trust, whether people trust their governments and whether people trust what they hear in the media. Because to have effective quarantine, you need the cooperation of the population. And that's a very problematic issue because this kind of trust has been eroded over the last few years. The other big issue, more long-term, is about surveillance. One of the dangers in the current epidemic is that it will justify extreme measures of surveillance, especially biometric surveillance, which will be, again, justified as a means to deal with this emergency. But even after the emergency will be over, it will remain. We are talking about a system of monitoring an entire population all the time for biometric signals, allegedly in order to protect people from future epidemics, but this can also form the basis of an extreme totalitarian regime. We are facing a huge issue of surveillance and privacy in our age, and I think that we'll see a big battle between privacy and health is likely to win. That people will have no privacy at all in the name of protecting them from the spread of such epidemics. Now, the thing is that the technology can be very effective. We now have the technology to monitor entire population and discover, for example, the outbreak of a new disease when it's only just beginning and it's very easy to contain it, and to follow all the infected people and know exactly where they are and what they do. But this kind of surveillance system can then be used to monitor many other things, what people think, what people feel, and if we aren't careful, this epidemic can give justification for the accelerating development of totalitarian regimes.
That's a pretty dramatic thought to try to digest. Humans are not meant to be self-isolating people or self-isolating species.
Mm-hmm.
And there are already anecdotal reports from Italy and elsewhere, you know, elderly women who like to go to a cafe, to chat, to have their regular contact, are being sort of disallowed. There's reports of loneliness and shut-in syndrome and depression. That's also a big worry for society.
Humans are especially vulnerable to epidemics because we are a social animal, and this is how epidemics spread. The thing about the viruses is that they often exploit the best parts of human nature against us. They exploit the fact not only that we like to socialize, but also that we help each other. When somebody is sick, the obvious, natural thing to do, especially if this somebody is a friend or a family member, is to come to them, to give them support, to take care of them, to give them emotional support, to touch them, to hug them. And this is exactly how the virus spreads. So the virus really makes use of the best parts of human nature against us. And again, there are two ways of how to deal with that. One way is to give information to people, and if people trust the information they receive, they can change their behavior at least until the epidemic is over. The other way is the totalitarian way. To have, again, it couldn't be done in the Middle Ages, but it can be done today just to survey everybody. So it's first of all to identify the initial signals of you're becoming sick. Like we now have the technology to know if you're even without putting something inside your body, just from a distance, to know if your body temperature is higher. And we can know all the people that you have met today. And we know who for example, broke the government instructions not to hug you or not to kiss you. So if people don't believe the information they receive and they don't do it out of trust, they can be compelled to do it by an omnipresent regime of surveillance. This is the dangerous path. I hope we don't go in that direction.
Yuval Noah Harari, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.